Good evening. Welcome to the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting of May 10th, 2021. We'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. Couple of quick housekeeping type items. If you are following along with an agenda, if you are following along from home, we don't appear to have any audience members in person this evening. In case there are anyone here, our agendas are always found just outside the door and to your right. If you're following along from home and would like a copy of our agenda, that can be found at the school board or the school district website. If you go to livoniapublicschools.org and go to the board tab, if you drop down there, you'll get all of the board meeting information. This evening's meeting is a committee of the whole meeting, and by that, this is the meeting where we discuss in great detail all of the items that are coming before the Board of Education. You will hear a lot of detail, a lot of questions and answers. The one thing you won't hear tonight are any votes on any items. Once we really beat everything to death and get all the questions and answers taken care of and cover everything that we can think of to ask about, when we determine it's ready to go to a vote, it'll be put on the agenda for the next meeting. So you won't have any votes tonight. One thing that this board is very committed to, along with our entire school district, is respect. This is something we do reiterate at each meeting, but we teach our students that that is one of the very important pieces of our climate and culture. We expect respect between our students, between our adults, and between our adults and students together. This board is very committed to modeling that very aspect. We will treat one another with respect. We can agree or disagree on issues, but we are not going to be disrespectful with one another. We ask the same in return for anybody who is approaching the board tonight or any other evening. The other thing that we are thrilled to pieces about is the fact that we finally get to meet in person again. We are finally back as of the last few weeks. We do therefore follow and expect anybody who's participating in our meetings to follow all mitigation measures that are required in our schools, which include masks, distancing, etc. And we thank you very much for complying with that so that we all get to continue to meet in person. We have a very special thank you this evening, and that is to the members of all of the LPS community. We have worked very diligently for the last several months preparing a bond request for our community. There are many members of our community who worked very diligently to get the message out about the bond, and we are thrilled to report back, in case you did not hear, that our school bond passed by a 71% to 29% margin, which we are thrilled about. Over the next few months, we'll see some exciting additions to our school district, including some playground equipment that we still need. We'll be seeing things over the next few years, such as air conditioning, an early childhood center, expanded robotics programming, so a whole lot of things that we really have been wanting to do for our district. We now have the funding source to do, and we thank the members of our community from the bottom of our hearts. We are, obviously the people in this room are very passionate about schools, passionate about high quality education in Livonia, and we are thrilled to see that high of a percentage of our community be able to, or be willing to financially back that same decision. So thank you so very much. The first thing on our agenda this evening is audience communications. I don't see anybody in our audience or have any blue slips. Is there anybody who would like to participate in audience communications this evening? Seeing none, we'll go to the next item on our agenda, and that is our committee of the whole. First item is the Wayne Risa board election, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Burton. Annually, whenever the Wayne Risa Board of Education has their election, we are asked to approve the designation of a delegate, a representative for our board, to participate in the process for the Wayne County Risa Board election. That designated representative is directed to cast a vote on the ballot on behalf of the board for a specific candidate, and we are in that process at this time. As of May 13th, we will receive the names of all members of the community who have asked to be on the ballot for the Wayne Risa Board of Education. At this point in time, there is one vacancy on the board, and there is one member of the community, Jim Petrie, who is a longtime Wayne Risa board member, who has submitted his name to be on the ballot. There are no others that have been submitted as of this time, but we will confirm with you at the close of business on May 13th if there are any additional names. So on next Monday, May 17th, we would ask you to vote on the resolution that you see before you, and you will assign one designated representative from our board to participate in that election on June 7th. So we will bring that to you next Monday, but we wanted to notify you of that. Really, there is no discussion at this time, as there is only one candidate. It is an incumbent, unless you'd like to have any discussion on that single candidate, but at this time, there are no others that have been added to the slate.
Are there any comments or questions on this item? I have one question. Mrs. Oquist, do you remember if we need to send a representative of our board to physically be present?
It is a virtual meeting, and yes, you would have to be on that virtual meeting.
Okay, so it's virtual this year?
Yes.
Okay, but we do have to have someone.
Yes, and normally, the timing is such that shortly thereafter, you're able to join our
Okay.
meeting on that evening, because it is a Monday, June 7th.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
All righty, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go to the next item, which is the item 2B, the draft calendar for the 2021-22 board meetings. And back to Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Burton. As you know, you and I reviewed this last week during our weekly meeting, and President Burton and I would like to bring to the board a recommended list of meetings for the 2021-22 school year. If you recall that this is not an item on which we will vote until July 26th at our organizational meeting, at which time we vote on the regular meetings calendar for the rest of the year. However, we wanted to bring to you the proposed calendar, which includes study sessions, committee of the whole meetings, regular board meetings, and proposed board workshops. The study sessions and committee meetings currently begin at 6:30 p.m. We've discussed this, and we'd like to make a recommendation that we extend that same time to our regular board meetings for your consideration. So President Burton and I talked about if the board was amiable to that, we would have all of our meetings with a 6:30 start time, with the exception of sometimes there's perhaps a meeting that we have prior that begins at 6, but it would remain a consistent start time for all of our meetings, study sessions, committee, and regular. That would be a change from past practice, but we would certainly note that, not only on our website, but when the meetings are posted. And we certainly have ample time to be able to communicate that out, because we won't have our first meeting under that schedule until July 26th. So I'll give you a moment. It is uploaded on your board book to review. And if you have any questions, certainly we'd be happy to take a look at the calendar. It follows a very similar pattern, so that we do have a study session, a committee meeting, and a board meeting in each month. And we've taken into account the school calendar as it relates to specific breaks. And then 2 dates are on a Tuesday, the day following the holiday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the 17th, so we would have the meeting on the 18th. And then the study session in May would be on Tuesday, the 31st, the day following Memorial Day.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments? First, let's just address the dates on the whole. Are there any questions or comments or suggested changes on any of the dates that we have? All righty, seeing none, let's take a moment for comments about the switch from a 7 o'clock to a 6:30 start time for our general or voting meetings. Any thoughts or comments on that? Mrs. Bonifield?
Sarah, can we go back to the November meeting?
Absolutely, go right ahead.
Is the November 22nd meeting the week of Thanksgiving?
It is the Monday prior to. There is not one the Monday after Thanksgiving. This is the Monday prior to, is the 22nd.
Is there, would it be, switch that to the week after?
It would be the, let me see here.
We have that
have-
currently scheduled as a workshop, but
Oh,
we
it
could
is?
certainly, the November 29th.
What we
Oh, I
could
was
do
looking
is,
at
if we're trying to avoid the
Yeah.
Thanksgiving week, what we could do is shift the entire month back 1 week, where we would have the study session on November 1st, the committee meeting on the 8th, and the voting meeting on the 15th, if we're trying to avoid the Thanksgiving week. Is that what we're talking, is that kind of what your thought is?
Yeah.
Okay. What are the thoughts from the group on shifting everything 1 week? Mrs. Oquist, first from the
certainly-
superintendent cabinet perspective, would that work for you?
It would.
Okay. Board, what are the thoughts?
I can
Seeing-
tell you, the November 15th, I won't be here.
You won't be here on November 15th?
Right.
Okay. Which would then be the
Regular meeting.
regular
Be a
meeting?
regular.
Okay. Other than that, do we have any? Yep, hit your mic.
Is there a reason we want to avoid that week? What would be the reasoning to avoid the Thanksgiving week? I mean, that Monday's, and it doesn't seem like there'd be a lot of people gone on Monday, or I don't understand why we would switch it.
We're gone that week.
Oh,
We've been historically been gone that week
Oh,
for the
okay.
last several years. But if it messes up with Mark, then we won't have to change it.
One of us has an issue.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, either way.
Okay. We don't have to vote on it yet. How about if we do this? Take a look at your calendars. If it looks like there's more than one person who's got a problem with one versus the other, we'll go with whatever is minimally disruptive to the board. Sound good?
Okay.
Okay. And we certainly have time. We don't vote on this until the July meeting. So take a look at the calendars and keep that in mind. If it winds up being that other folks have conflicts for any meetings, let us know too, because if we can shift it, we will. And go from there. Okay. Any other date issues that we know of? No? All righty. Switching back to the discussion about the time, moving our regular or general voting meetings from 7 o'clock to 6:30. What are the comments or thoughts from board members?
I'm good.
Fine with that?
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Works for everybody?
Mhm.
Looks, I'm getting
Yeah.
nods and okays and
Yes.
thumbs ups. Okay.
Yeah.
Okey-doke. It's equally fine for me, and I think on top of working for the board, it certainly will be easier for cabinet to not have an additional 30 minutes of lag time between your regular workday and needing to start a board meeting. So that, again, will be a July, we could start that in July. We really could start it earlier if we notified folks, or we could just simply start it in July for the next fiscal year.
That makes sense, because we have voted on, you have adopted the meeting schedule for regular board meetings, so we would have to change that.
Okay. We'll just start that then with the fiscal year, if that's all right with everybody. Mrs. Jarvis?
I'm just curious to know why it was 7 in the first place when the other meetings were 6:30.
Going back 12 years, it's always been 7, and I have no idea where it started before that. Anybody
But-
have a clue?
I don't.
My guess was maybe to give families a little more time to get home and get over here, if there's like special presentations or something.
It could be,
I don't know, that was the only thing I could think of.
yeah.
I'd like to just note, and we will certainly make sure that people are aware of this, but during the central office renovations this summer, we will not be holding meetings in person in the boardroom. However, they will be in person. They will be held at Riley Upper Elementary, located at 5 Mile and Henry Ruff, beginning with the June 7th Committee of the Whole through at least the August 16th Committee of the Whole, which actually is not very many meetings. That's the 2 meetings in June, the meetings meetings on July 26th, and then the meeting on August 16th. So at this point, we're only talking about 4 meetings, possibly 5 if that gets extended to August 23rd. We will certainly post that on the website as a special notice. We'll post it under the board meeting schedule and on all physical postings as well.
Alrighty. Okay, any other comments on the calendar?
It's not to be voted on until July 26th.
Correct, it'll be part of the organizational meeting.
Yep.
So it's really for discussion.
Really for your
only.
planning
Yep.
purposes, so that the board and cabinet had the schedule starting into June and July. and are able to plan accordingly.
Mrs. Bonnefield and then Mr. Johnson.
So I know usually.
You know what, Mrs. Bonnefield, is your mic on?
Oh, no.
There you go.
I know historically Mrs. Wozniak doesn't add those dates to the calendar until, they're voted on. Is there any way she can put them on now so we can kind
Sure.
of see where it is and on
Yes, I will ask
a
her
better
if she would,
visual?
if she would do that for us.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
This is probably a little bit premature because we're not back, although we're back in person, we have social distancing and we're all wearing masks. But at one time, we held our meeting at various locations. We went to
Mhm.
schools,
Mhm.
and I think we should really start thinking about that again. This is probably a little premature, but when we finally get back to our normal schedule and we can all meet in person without masks and we can sit next to one another, that we consider doing that again.
I think it's a fabulous idea. Thoughts
Okay.
from the other board members? Again, I'm seeing,
That was such a meaningful thing. Attending, traveling around the district and having our meetings at different buildings, attending those different communities. It was so meaningful, and it was wonderful to meet the people in the communities and have them meet us and do presentations and let us learn about that school community in a way that sitting here in the boardroom, it just doesn't happen. Truly, one of the highlights of being on the school board is that interaction with the school communities. I'd look forward to doing that again.
I totally agree. Mrs. Acosta, were you trying to say something also?
I was just saying I would appreciate it also just getting to know all the different buildings and who belongs to which one. I only know my little triad, so it's really helpful to have that opportunity.
Sounds good. Anybody else? No? All right. So yes, definitely, if we could work that in.
Absolutely, we would
we'll,
love to.
Yep. Sounds good. And I know that at times that have been associated with school improvement plans, presentations, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It can simply be visits to the schools.
Yes,
So-
and I think the last few, what we've done is just ask them to share points of pride
Mhm.
about their school, and those have been, I think, really well received by the board, as well as a great opportunity for the staff and school community to share all that they're proud of at their school.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. That finishes up with Committee of the Whole. We are now on to item 2, Finance, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Bonnefield.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith is coming to help us with this, and our first item is approval to appoint the auditor.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. Yes, our first item to appoint the auditor, I would like to recommend that we continue with Plant Moran as our main auditor for this coming fiscal year end. We've been using them for several years now and have found great benefit in working with them. They're not only a good resource for us at the end of the year. Again, their main role is to come into our district, comb through our records, make sure that we're following all of our board policies, the laws, both federal, state, and local. They also test our internal controls to make sure we have proper controls in place. And then they're also a resource for us throughout the school year. They provide professional development through various organizations, webinars that are free to attend, and also they're just a phone call away. So if we've got a question, maybe something new is on the horizon, issuing a bond, wanting to do something, different, there's somebody that you can call and run, our plan by and get a green light from them. So they definitely serve as a valuable resource for us throughout the year. I'm currently working with them to get the final fee set up, so I'll have that for the board packet on Wednesday. But really, over the last few years, we found that their fee that they've requested has been very reasonable for the level of service that they do provide. I'd also like to recommend that we continue to engage Yo and Yo to audit our sinking fund and bond funds. And again, they've found to be very useful partners and a great resource for us, very good to work with. So we'd like to recommend that we continue them as our subsidiary audit firm as well.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. And Mrs. Smith, can you explain just to community members who may be watching why we have two
Sure.
auditing firms?
I'd be happy to. That's something we started when the 2013 bond passed, and we hired Plant Moran Cressa as our owner's rep. Because of the relationship between Plant Moran, the auditing firm, and Plant Moran Cressa, we wanted to be abundantly transparent and clear, and again, have a second set of eyes on those books to make sure that there was no kind of collusion, which there wouldn't be. That would be against everything that Plant Moran, the auditing firm, stands against. But again, it was just a second layer to know that there's a second set of eyes, completely separate from Plant Moran Cressa, that were looking at our bond and our sinking funds.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Mrs. Burton?
Just wanted to make a comment. I'm definitely in favor of continuing our relationship with Plant Moran Cressa, or Plant Moran as the auditing portion, knowing that they do K-12 through such a majority of the state. This is not just a portion of what they do or something they do on the side, but rather this is just a main component of what their work is. And they're just seen in Michigan as the experts. So as large a district as we are, I would like to have the folks that we believe are really, and not that other folks can't do a good job at this, but Plant Moran excels. And just as a point of interest, a number of years back, someone suggested that we switch auditing firms and just make sure that other folks are seeing our books the same way that Plant Moran has been. And to my knowledge, at least the last 12 years, and I know it was a number of years before that, but my 12 years on the board, with Plant Moran and with Yo and Yo looking at our books, they've both come through with unqualified opinions, which is the highest level of assurance that our books are being taken care of properly. So it's, in case anyone's wondering if we have switched, we have in the last handful of years, just to get a different set of eyes looking at it. But I'm definitely in favor of keeping Plant Moran on as our main auditor.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. Mrs. Smith, do we generally get the same auditors year in and year out, or they have a different team?
We do. We've had the same manager, Tom Marchese, on. I believe our first year with them was 2012, because that was my first year-end audit, and that was his first year assigned to Livonia Public Schools, and he's been with us since 2012. And during that time, we've only had two partners, too. We had one partner that I think transitioned to another part of the organization, but now we've had Lisa Vargo as the partner in charge for the last maybe at least 5 years. So it's nice because we do have consistency of staffing, and they may bring on, a new intern or something like that to help them with some of the testing, but the managers have been consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you. Will this go to a vote next week then?
It would, please. Thank
Okay,
you.
on the regular meeting. Thank you.
All right, I just wanted to say, I think especially right now with the way that everything with the pandemic and all of the government funding and the federal funding, that I think sometimes when people see the numbers for what it costs us to have the audit done, it's a little shocking for some people, but I have to say that with Plant Moran being so large, they have the resources to be able to do all of the research and make sure that they have all of these areas covered, because they have enough business to put 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 people on each portion of what's going on, so they could research it fully, and they're able to do that. And being in a small non-public accounting firm now, it has been a struggle. Things have been switching so fast, and we don't have those resources to be able to go back to the different people. So working with a very large firm like Plant Moran, especially in times like this, is so important to make sure that we get everything that we can out of all of the government, subsidies and stuff like that, to make sure that we're in there. So I'm very glad that we have Plant Moran. They do a very good job.
Yep. Yes, you make a very good point, because they're not only out here for 3 weeks on site going through our records, then they're back in their office helping compile the financial statements and, being available for the board for questions and whatnot. But as you stated, because of the size of the organization, they have teams that are designated to be on top of the GASBs that are coming out, on top of these ESSER funds that are coming out, to make sure that we have all the information we need to know to make sure that we're doing proper record keeping, but then they know, the different things that they should test to make sure that everything's being spent accordingly, so.
Okay, anything else? Okay, we will move on to B with Mrs. Smith again, and it's approval of resolution for Wayne Risa budget.
Thank you, Ms. Bonifield. In your packet this week was the proposed budget from Wayne Risa, who serves as the intermediate school district for Wayne County school districts, 33 districts here in Wayne County, as well as the charter schools. I'll point out a few highlights. I really hone in on the general fund. I think that speaks to their general fiscal health, and they have a healthy fund balance as they've had in the past. Their ending fund balance for this past June 30th was $15.7 million, which is 124% fund balance. And their proposed ending fund balance for this coming fiscal year would be $13.8 million, or 72%. So again, putting that in terms of a percentage, because that helps compare apples to apples, MSBO recommends a 15 to 20% fund balance, so them proposing to end with a 72% fund balance is definitely a very healthy fiscal spot to be in, and that helps in the services that they're then able to provide to the local district. So the other fund that I pay particular attention to is our Act 18 fund. As you all know, we run 4 different Act 18 special education programs. This is money that the county there's a special education millage that goes out, and then Wayne Risa collects that and then operates these Act 18 programs on behalf of the children here in Wayne County. And again, I hone in on their ending fund balance to see what kind of state they're in, and again, a very healthy fund balance. Their Act 18 projected fund balance for this coming June, as in June of 2022, would be $221.7 million, or 125%. And this has been consistent with what it's been in the past. One thing that we have requested over the few years as we see what these fund balances are some additional supports in the district, and Wayne Risa has been very receptive to that, and I'm pleased to share that the budgets that we asked for approval for this year have been fully approved. And so they're definitely hearing us and helping as they can. And they've continued to look at different ways where they can help the local districts. You might recall for the last several years they've made a special education transportation payment to the district, and for us that's about $800,000 that they help. A little background. So for our special education transportation, we fill out a financial report every year, and the state reimburses us 70% of the cost of our special education transportation costs. And then what Wayne Risa does is pick up the unreimbursed portion of that. So that's definitely been a help to our general fund. So again, the Act 18 program is looking very healthy. So I'm supportive of the budget that they've presented to us. One question I did want to circle back to that was brought up during our study session last week was what happens if districts don't support the budget? Is there any ramifications for the ISD? And the answer to that is there's nothing legally that requires them to change it. What they are legally required to do is to take it under advisement. So my assumption would be that if they had a resounding feedback from local districts that they weren't supportive, that would be something they'd want to circle back with their financial team to see if they could address. But legally, that wouldn't mean that they would not be able to adopt their budget as they presented it to the districts.
Any questions? President Burton.
Obviously, and this board knows that they make a significant contribution toward the special education transportation. That's above and beyond what they had done in previous years. Mm-hmm. They've done that in the last few years. Just for the benefit of the public, can you hit some of the highlights of what RISA funds for the district?
Sure. So it's based on a certain population of students. They do not fund all of our expenditures related to our special education students. It's for more severe. So we have a program for moderative cognitive impairment, visually impaired, students on the autism spectrum, and then work skills program for our 18 to 26-year-olds. So there's a specific criteria that the students must meet to be able to qualify for Act 18 funding. And so then if they do qualify for Act 18, those costs are fully funded between the state, who, again, we do a special education report for our instructional expenditures for our special ed students. The state is reimbursing 28%, and then in the last year or so, they're also doing an additional 2%. So we receive roughly 30% reimbursement from the state. So for our students that don't qualify for Act 18, then our general fund picks up the remaining 70% of the costs. But for Act 18 students, the state covers 30%, and then Act 18, the Wayne RESA, picks up the remaining 70%. And again, that's something a local taxpayer would see on their bill as a special education millage, and that specifically goes to these purposes.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. Mrs. Smith, you may or may not know the answer to this question, but looking at the enhancement millage fund, the revenues are projected to go down $2.3 million.
I think that is them being conservative. Nothing that I've seen would make me believe that we should budget any less for enhancement millage. As if anything, property tax values have gone up. And so again, I feel like how, just like we are the most conservative in our proposed budget, and then as we get closer to the end of the year, we will, I'll say, relax our budget a little bit or get it, closer to the actual. I think that's what they're representing in their proposed budget, that it's taking a conservative stance, but I think we'll see that go up. Again, we haven't had any indication from Wayne RESA that we should expect anything less in Wayne County Enhancement Millage funding.
And the only other thing I would add to that is there has been a variety of collection rates across the 33 districts and their municipalities. And in different years, they've had different success with that collection rate. As you know, in Livonia, it's very high. I think it's 97%. That is not the same in every community. And so I do think they leave themselves some room to then be able to amend the budget over the course of the year once they see how those tax collections are coming in.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thanks.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Also, Mr. Johnson, remember that the Wayne County Enhancement Millage now is going to be including charter schools. Perhaps they're not included in this budget. That cut.
And they, this current levy actually goes through 2022, so this budget would still include the previously approved enhancement millage. That you're right, though, the new levy, which will take place in, I think it will be tax year then 2023, that will include charter schools. So we'll definitely have to be mindful of that and what impact that'll have on our revenue from this source. But as you can see too in the budget, the revenues equal the expenditures. They don't withhold any for administrative costs. It's simply they're a pass-through for the local districts. They collect it and then they allocate it out to the school district based on a per pupil amount.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, and this will be on voting,
Yes,
for
please.
voting.
Thank you.
And then our last item with Mrs. Smith is the update on the sale of the bonds.
Thank you. As President Burton shared, we're very pleased to share with the community again that we've had a very strong support of our 2021 bond proposal with 71% passage rate. And so we wanted to talk through the next step for the board as well as for the district for moving forward with the 2021 bond. So the next step for the board would be for us to bring a resolution for your consideration at our next voting meeting on Monday to affirm the board's intent to move forward with the sale of these bonds, the first series of them. And the first series is, I believe, $78 million. That would be the next step for the board. The next step for the district, I've been working with our financial advisor, PFM, specifically Paul Stoddard, and looking at what our different options are for selling the bonds. There's different ways that we can sell it. There's through a competitive sale, negotiated sale, or a private sale. In 2013, for both series, we used a negotiated sale, and that had worked out very well for us. We also did a negotiated sale for the 2020 refunding we did this past fall. And in consultation with PFM, they're recommending that we continue with the negotiated sale for this bond. And that has a number of benefits to it. I made myself a little note so I wouldn't forget what to point out, but in essence, it gives us some flexibility in the structure of the repayments. It also allows for us to offer these to local residents that might be interested in buying bonds. It helps us when we're on a short timeline because the bonds must be sold by June 30th. The negotiated sale allows us to do some pre-marketing to interested parties. And so for that reason, we think that the negotiated sale is our best option. We've also just reached out to a few different underwriters. For the last few years, we have used JP Morgan. We used them for the 2013, again, both series, and we also use them for the refunding. They've come in as the lowest underwriter in terms of fees for these last couple of bonds. They've been, great to work with, so we've reached out to them as well as a couple other firms, and so we can bring an update to the board next week on who we are recommending for an underwriter. The next step would be then, after the board affirms that they would like to move forward with the sale, we'll then work with PFM and with the underwriter to get the ball rolling on this. And then the next action the board would take would be in June to firmly agree to the sale of the bonds and to ratify. We'll bring forward a resolution to ratify the sale in June on, I believe it's June 17th. One thing I did want to point out, we did get a few questions throughout the bond proposal as we were getting information out there to the community, and one of the questions was, how are we selling new bonds without any increase in cost to the taxpayer? And so I relate it kind of to like how it's different in that a mortgage, your monthly payments are set, and with the bond, our annual payments vary. And so every year, I come to the board and would request what our millage rate should be for the coming year. And so that will be taking place at our public hearing in early June. And based on what our current debt payments are for this coming tax year, the tax year 2021, if we did not pass this bond, we would be able to lower the tax rate. So we would lower the mills because our current debt payments are going to be lower this coming year. And so what we asked the community, we said because of these identified needs that we've identified in our 10-year facility assessment, instead of lowering the taxes, if you will agree to continue paying the same rate that you're paying now, we can issue $186 million worth of new bonds to reinvest into our buildings. One of the comments I heard was, okay, well, the tax rate might not be going up this year, but it's going to go up. And I can assure you, I work with PFM, our financial advisors, and we map out what the payments will be. This particular bond was a 20-year repayment. And as I look at the mills needed to repay this bond, as well as our other outstanding bonds over the next 20 years, the number of mills needed will not exceed 4.1 mills. And so it truly is a no tax rate increase over the next 20 years. The only way the debt tax rate increase would be us asking for additional money from the community, which we do not plan to do at this point. There's, again, this funding aligns with our 10-year facility assessment, so we'll be able to accomplish a majority of the things that we've outlined on that 10-year facility assessment. So that's how we're able to issue new bonds without any additional cost to the taxpayer. It's because we're in a position where we would have lowered the tax rate this year, but again, because our community was willing to support this, we're going to keep the rate as it is, and we'll be able to issue additional bonds, which will generate additional money for our district. The one thing I'll point out too, just a detail, again, we're not selling $186 million in the next few weeks. It would be difficult for us to spend $186 just logistically. So we're going to sell this bond in series, and that's a cost savings measure. So we're going to issue our first series of bonds, which would be $78 million, sometime in the next few weeks before June 30th. And so again, we're not going to request the full 186 because it would be challenging for us to get that amount of work completed in the next 2 years. But then in 2 years, we'll come before the board and request permission to sell the second series of bonds.
So in the 2013 bond, you'll recall we put two series. We spent it just under 100 million, and then the next one around 90-some million. And so this is in 3 series, and that is what we'll work with the through building and site to pace the spending of the bond, which projects will be completed each year, how many schools we can complete, and what dollars we will use, because in the first 3 years, we need to use 85% of the draw that we have on that first sale of bonds.
Mike, you need your microphone. You may want to repeat that. Series of bonds.
So in the 2013 bond, we sold that in 2 series, and as Mrs. Smith mentioned, we will be selling these in 3 series. And so we do have a requirement to utilize 85% of those funds in the first 3 years after we sell the first series of bonds. And as we've begun that process that we call pacing, and taking a look at how many projects we can reasonably complete in a summer or in a given year, how much money we'll draw down from the sale of bonds. We mesh those together. And as you know, we will not only continuously update the board, but also our community through the quarterly dashboard reports.
Don't think I mentioned this, so we are also, I'm working with PFM, we're also working with our bond counsel. So the bond counsel is Matt Heiser, and he'll be putting together the resolution for the board's consideration, and we'll have that ready for your packet on Wednesday. So you can review it before the board meeting on the 17th, and of course, reach out if you do have any questions.
Are there any other questions? President Burton?
Did you say it was going to be ultimately in 2 or 3 series?
This will be in 3 series.
3, okay, thank you.
So we will be voting on something next week, on the resolution.
Yes.
The resolution.
On the
The
res-
resolution,
Yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Smith, for that detailed explanation. I know I had reached out. There were some community questions about what is a bond, or just the misinformation. It seemed like there needed to be a little bit more clarity, like Bond 101. Just a quick, explanation of how bonds work. And there were questions about how it would be repaid, so I appreciate all that detail.
Thank you. This was a perfect time to go over it, and I do encourage, if anybody is listening and has any questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to my office anytime. We'd be happy to go over that and explain. I appreciated, we had a number of community members that called, reached out to the communications department and to the finance department leading up to the proposal, so I appreciate the people taking the time to learn it before they made a decision on it, so thank you to our community.
Okay. Everybody else set? Okay.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you.
Smith. And that ends finance.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 4, building and site. Now, I'll turn it over to Mr. Senders.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, we have,
Oh, look at that. Bill. Bill's here.
we have 2 items this evening, the first of which is approval of the greenhouse for Garfield Community School. Mr. Francis and Mrs. Terrell will be joining us for that item. Very exciting. We're looking forward to it. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. I will start just briefly that we had discussed for those who are watching at home or will watch after the fact. We brought this up at the study session and had just a little bit of discussion about it because there's some history here that Dr. Terrell will go over again for the community. So bear with us because I know we went through some of these items just last week. So I'll just turn it over to you for a minute and kind of go over the background, then we can talk about the actual purchase.
Great. Thank you very much. So we are very excited about this opportunity for us to have our greenhouse back under the same property as our Western Wayne Skill Center at Garfield. So as some of you may recall, attending some of our spring flower sales at Ford, where the old location of our Western Wayne Skill Center was located, we had a greenhouse out there. We were unable to move that greenhouse, so it has been a couple years with us planning and preparing for getting another greenhouse back at the new location, which is at Garfield Community School. So with the help of Healthy Livonia, a grant for $83,000 approximately, as well as Wayne County RESA, out of our capital outlay fund, they did provide us with support for $248,000 for the greenhouse. So this is a fully funded project, again, out of Act 18 funding, as well as a grant from Healthy Livonia for this greenhouse. We will be hopefully having this, as Phil will talk in a moment, with building in the fall. We do have our GSRP program also located at Garfield, so we see both programs being able to utilize the greenhouse once it is up and fully running. It is a joint project with the city as well, as part of our property abuts city property. So part of the plan is also to have an orchard built behind the greenhouse for community members as well. So once we get the greenhouse up and have Healthy Livonia approve all of our plans, we'll have a better understanding of the community support that we will have there. Again, it is a wonderful neighborhood that Garfield Community Schools is in. Wilson Barn, et cetera, working with the city to have a lot of community support out there with our planting beds outside of the greenhouse, as well as all of the planting we'll be able to do inside of the greenhouse. So we're very excited.
Yeah, we are, and it's been a lot of work. It's been a good partnership, and the real work in getting it in is still to come. But just the logistics over it was quite a bit of conversations and working through. One of the items that we found a challenge was starting off trying to build from scratch the greenhouse, and we ended up coming back to what you see in front of you is from Grosspan, who's out of Connecticut. This is really an all-in-one with regard to the greenhouse itself. They are on a source well that would satisfy the board's requirement, the district's requirement to bid, because it's been pre-bid on contract pricing now. So we use source well for other items throughout the time. So the quote we shared with you in your packet is for the greenhouse itself, but you can see the items that come with it. You saw that, if you flip through the line items, there's a controls system for the the fans and the heating, and there's the ventilation as part of it. All the items that are there's a traditional door and a roll-up door that's ADA compliant, but there is still work that will need to be done. So Dr. Terrill talked about the budget, and you have, I think, around 300-ish in total. This is $128,443.81 for this item. That includes the installation. That was one of the line items that we had with them. But just to prepare the board, we will be back in the future to talk about things like foundation, site work, drainage. Fortunately, we're partnering with the city, as Dr. Terrill said, so we will work with them with regard to hookups. We're going to need to hook up gas, electric, and water to this. So there is still work to come. We are going to need that budget that she has in this project. There's still some hefty costs to come up, but this is the real big one that we've been trying to land, and we're very happy and pleased to present it to you.
All right, questions, comments? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. Mr. Francis, is this going to require a backup electrical source for emergency use, like in storms and that type of thing? Is that necessary?
We did not discuss that. Being a greenhouse, the ventilation for it would really, in the summer, because it gets quite hot. We are not planning to put this on our generator. It'd be a very long run, and plus our generator is pretty much for the life safety items in the building. So I'll double check on it. I'll ask Mr. Lau, and we can even check in with the architects to see if that's something that they would recommend. But it doesn't sound like it's something that is going to happen, because in our preliminary discussions it wasn't brought up. But since you brought it up, I'll check on it.
Okay. Otherwise, looking at the photographs, it's a really impressive facility. Looking internally, obviously a greenhouse from the outside looks like a greenhouse, but inside it looks quite impressive with the various items that they have in there. So,
yeah, and anytime you have something with electronics and you're trying to hook in with controls, et cetera, there's always that level of this could be something that can deteriorate or fail. Conversations with reps from companies are always, you always have to take a little grain of salt in, it always works. But generally speaking, this system, the best way to describe the controls on this is if you have, like I do at home, I don't have like that whole nest where it learns you, but I can tap into it with my phone, et cetera. It's one of those types of systems where it has the controls over over the fans, et cetera, inside of the greenhouse. And that's obviously always going to be a concern whenever you introduce electronics to anything, the longevity of it. But that would be neither here nor there on the generator. That's just simply the electronics of items that we would have to keep an eye on.
Okay. And my recollection from our study session was that there are additional boxes outside of the greenhouse, and I'm assuming that's not part of this quote. That's going to be something separate.
That's correct. Those are planters for outside of the
Right.
greenhouse.
That's what I remember.
Yep, ADA compliant pathways. We're gonna have little planters for the GSRP program, wheelchair height for our wheelchair students,
Cool.
as well as adult height.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
So you can see there are other expenses that are going to be coming up with regard to flat work and the beds, as well as all the items I've mentioned already.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Centers.
Ms. Farrer.
Thank you, Mr. Centers. Okay, so this looks so wonderful. I'm so excited to get this project underway. This will be a freestanding building then, outside? It won't be abutting next to the building, correct?
Be quite a distance away from it.
Okay.
If you can imagine the back or east side of Garfield Community School is the parking lot.
Yes.
It's on the far side of the parking lot, up against where the grass is.
Excellent. Will this also have an irrigation or water system then? Will have to be incorporated?
Yeah, in fact, one of the line items are the reels. I think we had the reels added in. So if you think about when you go to a garden center and you see they have the hoses on the reels and then they can pull them down, that's
Sprayers
one of
and-
the reasons we need to hook up water to the structure.
Excellent.
Yes, no, it's not automatic sprinklers, but it's a
Yes.
reel that's there that's connected to water. We will need have watering system, but
I'm
not
assuming the
an
students will
automated.
be in charge.
Correct.
That's part of the learning of
Correct,
the
correct.
system. Excellent. And when do we project that this may be happening?
This would be aiming for late summer, early fall to get working on it, because we have to do some preparation before we can have the structure delivered and installed, the foundation, and some other work has to occur.
Excellent. Well, I'm all in favor of it. I think this is such a wonderful project and really looking forward to seeing this all come to fruition. So, thank you. And glad to see the partnership with the community and Healthy Livonia. I think that is just such a win-win for everybody. So, exciting project. Great job.
Yeah, they've been good people to work with, and you know them better than I do, but the meetings I've been in, they're all very good people, and,
Oh, yeah,
just
they're
supporting
excited.
Livonia, yeah, they're great.
Thank you.
I just want to just make a mention that, Dr. Terriel has really championed this work, and she serves as our district's representative on Healthy Livonia, and I think she shared with you last week, many members of the team, including the president of St. Mary Mercy and the president of our Chamber of Commerce, the mayor's office, and Jen is regularly involved in those initiatives, and this is just one example, but as you know, she is often our representative in the community, and is really tireless in her efforts to advocate for all of our students in our school community. So this is just another one of those examples, and it's, I think, something when the board looked at closing Ford Skills Center as is and moving the property, this was one of the pieces I know that the board had asked about. Certainly Dr. Terriel, Mr. and Dr. Meese had also talked about that and knew that that was an important element, that's something the board heard from the community. And so this really is one of those full circle pieces. It took a little bit of time, but certainly Dr. Terriel was persistent in continuing to reach out in partnerships, and I know Mr. Francis and Mr. Lau jumped right in to help find this resource. You would think it would be a little easier than it was, but we're really excited to be able to see this element that was at the Ford Skills Center come to the Garfield Community School property. So thank you both.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this project. Most of my garden came from the Skills Center, and I need to add more in there. I'm curious, though, on the quote from ClearSpan. I'm not a financial person, so maybe you can explain why item 24 is listed twice.
It's, if you look at the next page, it's just like, it's both line 24. It's not added in twice. It's like the page crept over. They're both line 24 with the same item number.
And the same content?
Yes, like it printed on the next page, it was like a carryover.
Okay,
It just
so-
seems like an accident in their print.
Has it been added to the total
No.
twice?
No.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
One other.
This, oh, Mrs. Berger.
Just one other thought along the lines of the generator. Luckily with that, the biggest need would be for heat. So we would have some time at least to play with. I mean, even if we couldn't afford to get a generator that's gonna service that greenhouse, if that's just not cost effective to do that, if we were in a situation where we lost power and we knew it was gonna be for an extended period of time, we would have enough time to move a lot of those plants into the school, even if it was gonna be on a temporary basis. So it's not a complete loss if we were to lose power.
Yeah, and there are ways to hook up temporary generator as opposed to having a built-in gas, natural gas like we do in our buildings. There are ways which we've done in some of our buildings for temporary, to where you have the feed connected to the exterior on the items that you're most critical with, and then you can bring a diesel or a gasoline generator up to it in those moments. But we would have to prepare for that, but that could always be something down the road that we look at.
Sounds good.
Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. Along those lines, since the greenhouse is going to be quite a distance from the school building, how do we plan to secure the facility, or how are there plans for that so that we don't have any theft or, people getting into that greenhouse? Do we have any plans for that, or how do we?
Beyond it's a
locking
locked
it?
structure, and it's not glass anymore, so you can't just break the glass. It's beyond the locked doors, and again, it's not a glass structure where someone can break the glass and get in. It would be, I guess, no different than, it's not gonna be alarmed if that, I don't know if, I guess I'm trying to interpret your
Yeah,
question.
just-
It's gonna be a
just
locked
wondering.
structure like our sheds and our
Okay.
garages that we have on our multiple properties across the district.
Okay, yep, that's good.
Except instead of driving away a gator, they're gonna get an armful of tomatoes maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that would be unfortunate. That would just be something that we obviously have a concern over, but right now, it's not, it's
It'll
a
be
traditionally
as secure
secured
as we
building.
can make it.
Yeah, it's a traditionally secured building on our property, one of our outbuildings essentially.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mrs. Berger.
It looks like the walls are glass or plastic or something. If they're
Yeah.
not, what are they?
I asked that too, because I'm used to the older traditional greenhouses, and I said, what happens with regard to, I know this isn't gonna break, but with regard to the staining and it's a completely updated, material. Yeah, I don't know if it's poly or not, and it may be, but you remember I brought that up in our meeting with Greenspan, and they said that, the rep said, it doesn't shatter, it doesn't break, it doesn't yellow, it's been around now, they've been using it for quite some time, and it's a solid item, because one of the very first questions that came up the first time we talked about putting a greenhouse on property, and someone said, you're gonna put an apple orchard next to a glass building, you know where that's gonna lead. Ultimately, it won't.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. All right, thank you. That'll move us on to item B, which is playground equipment.
By the way, Mr. Centers, I would like to request that to go on the regular meeting, please.
Great.
Thank you. So the approval to purchase playground equipment, we have a lengthy quote on there because there's, all of our K-6 buildings are listed individually, much like we did in 2018 when we were putting playground equipment on the buildings. So one of the main goals here was to take stock of what's on our K-6 playgrounds and remove items that are dated. So we knew back in 2017, when we started the replacements through the 2013 bond of playground structures, we had items, and I'll take you back a little bit if you don't remember. It was, we had to remove, based upon a review and an assessment of our playground structures and equipment, we had multiple items that were listed on that review as dangerous, head entrapment, et cetera. So we had to remove those at the beginning of a school year where it was concerning, because now we had a couple of schools, about 4 schools, that were pretty light on items. So all of this started working at that time. We replaced some of those right away, and then by 2018, during that spring, summer, and early fall, we were coming to the board, we were replacing, and we had quite a bit of new structures. Now, with regard to the K-4 buildings and the 5-6 buildings, the large playscapes, the large multi-structures, at that time, in most buildings, but not all, but at most schools, one of the large play structures were replaced. We had a handful that weren't because we had 2 different ages, and we removed all of the oldest items, replaced them, and then we had individual events, as we call them, or individual smaller structures that were replaced throughout different buildings. And some of those came out early, and we replaced them early in the fall at about 4 different buildings, and then over the summer and early fall of 18, we replaced many more. And all of that was done through committee. We had a playground committee made up of teachers and administrators from the elementaries, K-6. We had the facilities folks, myself, we had the elementary director at the time, et cetera. So we had all of this work that we did, a lot of surveys, a lot of back and forth with the buildings, and we took all that information, and that's how we made our purchases. What we landed on, the narrowing down of, instead of saying, here's a 1,000-page catalog, the narrowing down of items. And I give that background because all of that good work we kept. And because it's only been a few years, all of the items that we were purchasing back in 2018 are still available to us from the same organization, Great Lakes Recreational. So they also, through Sourcewell, have the pricing, much like they did before. That's contract pricing. We looked at what we had chosen and narrowed down to previously, had them check to make sure that all of those are still manufactured, available items. They all were. So what we then did was turned back to our elementary buildings, and through the principals, gave them a survey, gave them a packet that went with that electronic survey saying, here's all the items that are available. All of these should look familiar to you. If you just look out in your own playground, you're probably going to see some of these items. What would you want in preparation for the bond? What would you want if it does pass and we're able to replace these things? So they did on their end. They filled out the information. They stated what they want. And then we worked with individual buildings as needed to say, we've been to your playground. That one item right there is in very poor shape. We're definitely going to replace that. Or, it looks like you've got almost everything new except this one thing. So in the long story short, we're just about going to have every single item replaced at all of our K-6 buildings. Meaning, when I say everything will be new, I mean between 2018 and 2021, everything will be new except for a couple of small items. The camels at a few of our buildings, right? Those aren't going anywhere. Those are items, and there's a few pieces like that they just don't have moving parts, or they don't break down. The items with more moving parts or with lots of chains and slides and ladders, near everything's going to be replaced. The one main exception I can think of off the top of my head would be like Riley. Now, in 2018, we did not remove anything from Riley. We added one. It's not a multi-structure, but it was one good-sized single event, a big climber that they had. And that was because, for the history of it, when Riley went from a middle school to an upper elementary school, they had their playground equipment added in because the middle school didn't have playground equipment. So theirs was in better condition at the time. We are now going to go back in there, working with the PE teacher and the principal, looking through what they have on site. The items that are older, like the swings, all of our schools got swings in 2018. Riley did not, so we are going to put in the 12 bays and replace them to have updated swings. They're going to get a large multi-structure like Johnson has and like Cooper has. So we've got a few things that are gonna go in there, a few things that are gonna stay because they're in good, strong condition, and Riley's gonna be updated. So they're just looking a little bit different. But across the board, we are gonna have kind of the finishing touches on our playgrounds, working both from the playground committee that we had a few years ago and currently with the principals and the folks in the buildings. So just trying to give you a lot of background on it because it's a big deal. Playgrounds are a very big deal both to our students, our staff, our community. So I just wanted to make sure I gave enough of the background of where we were and how we got here.
All right, questions or comments? Mrs. Burden?
If I remember correctly from 18, when we did a lot of this, it kind of boiled down to everyone's not going to get the same number of new pieces necessarily. Everyone's going to get what they need so that the schools are all equitable.
That's a very good point. What we talked about with a couple principals that I had conversations with when they had questions, I would say, we're not looking to excavate any new grounds on your building. We're doing one-for-one replacements for what you have. And just over the years, and for whatever reason, some buildings might have 2 or 3 individual events in an area, and another K4 might have 4 events. It's sort of how it played out. We weren't looking to say, everybody's got to have 2 of these, 4 of those, 7 of those. It wasn't like that. We were just coming in now to say, that's old, that's not going to last much longer, we can't get parts for it anymore. We're going to remove that, and we're going to put something in its place. You can choose it along with the colors.
Right, thank you.
Great. Any other questions, comments?
And I didn't say it out loud for the folks at home, but just so I put it onto the video. The total for all of these at this point comes to $1,794,391. And we are intending to have a 3% contingency on that for any incidentals. When you start digging in the ground and pulling items out of the ground, a 3% contingency on that. And that's within what we had laid out for our budget for playground equipment.
And how is it being paid?
And that's from the 2021 bond. I'm going to have to get used to saying that, Mr.
Senator. Been able to say that. It's
Glad I said it right the first time.
Yeah, you did. Congrats. All right. Well,
And
Mrs.
then
Byrne?
that'll go over how many buildings? Is it
Let's
16
see here,
buildings?
real quick, 15.
15 buildings.
Yeah, we are working with Jackson separately because they don't have the same type of size and scope of that. So we're actually working with both Webster and Jackson for their playgrounds that service our students with disabilities and have special needs, and it's uniquely or modified playground equipment, swings, et cetera.
Okay.
Great.
So
So again, I
sometimes,
just do want to reiterate, an important point that you made at the end, which is as we laid out for our community, areas on which we were going to spend money on the bond, and we had that graphic that shared what percentage. This is, we're just about at that point, but we are still under what we had allocated within the bond funds for that. And so I'm, very appreciative of Mr. Francis and the elementary principals turning this around so quickly, because it is certainly something that we have heard about from our community that is not only impactful for students while they're at school, but for families, grandparents, families who do not yet have school-age children but have young children that access the playgrounds on the weekends and during the summer. So it's exciting to see a project already underway.
Mr. Francis, one last question. When will people start seeing these structures going up in their communities?
So we were told by Great Lakes Recreational that if we could get it in May, it's probably a 6 to 8, hopefully not as far as 10. I get very concerned about many of the items that are out there now. Everyone knows about the skyrocketing prices, the delays on deliveries, but as of our last conversation, we're looking at about call it 8 on average week for the items to come in, and then it would probably take them another 8 to 10 weeks to remove and install across all of our playgrounds. So it's gonna be spilling into the fall. I'm not gonna say it's not. It's absolutely similarly to 3 years ago when it did spill into the fall. But having gone to every one of the playgrounds over the past month and a half or so and looked at the structures and taken pictures, even I was surprised how much we did back in 18. Like, it was amazing when you go back and say, holy smokes, this playground, everything but this one large structure, we actually got to because it was in such poor condition at the time. So I don't think it's going to have the same impact that it had in 18 because most of our playgrounds have quite a bit, and there are multiple buildings, playgrounds, where perhaps only one side, one large structure is being done, and that's it. That means they have all of the individual events, they have the other large structure, and obviously all the brand-new swings are still there. So I'm hoping that the impact on students will be less than it was in the fall of 18.
Great. Thank you. Anything else? All right, that concludes building and site. Thank you,
And,
Mr. Francis.
and again, onto the voting
Regular
meeting.
agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item 5, Policy Committee, and I will turn it over to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Burton. We have a review of the policies that we went over at our study session, and I will let Mrs. Oquist lead us through these.
Thank you so much, Vice President Johnson. I will start with the bylaws of the board, BBD. We made a change from the last meeting, and in the subheading, changed the word relations to functions. Beyond that, all of the areas marked in red we reviewed last week. I do not believe there were any other changes that the board had requested from the study session. And so we would recommend bringing this forward for a first reading next week to our May 17th meeting, unless you have any other changes for board bylaw BBD.
Everybody good with the language of BBD? Outstanding. All right, so we'll move with that one next week. And so we'll move on to BCAC.
Thank you. We added from last week in the first paragraph, I know the board would like to have discussion with regard to calling a special meeting. However, I will note in the last line of that, it was recommended that we add the word public before notice. So that is an addition from last week that was not there. You'll see that marked in red. All other areas marked in red or strike through, we had previously discussed. If you don't have any other recommended changes, then we can go back to the start of that bylaw, which refers to special meetings of the Board of Education may be called by the president of the board, or it currently says any 2 members thereof. You may recall that we advised the board that that is not a requirement according to MASB. That is a policy that this board had previously set and has the ability to change or alter. So I'll turn it back over to the board for dialogue about that piece in particular.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. One of the discussions that we had, Karen, and we didn't want to move on that until you were here and able to participate in the discussion. And we had a rather lengthy discussion on how many members it would require to call a special meeting. And Mrs. Burton made some important points and suggested that we have 3, it would be 3 board members to call a special meeting. And if you want to do it, President Burton, and just reiterate your thoughts so that Karen understands.
Sure. I think it's important to note, too, that still, no matter what we do with this policy, any 2 members can put an item on the agenda, in addition to the president. So this is specifically not talking about just putting an item on the agenda, but calling an actual meeting. And my concern with having it be 2 members of the board is we've been very blessed to have a very strong functioning team. However, that's not always the case on every board all the time. And to have as small a number as 2 be able to call meetings, that's a small number that has control over the entire board and the entire agenda. And that concerned me. I think that 3 members to call a meeting is an appropriate number. It's still not a quorum, but by the time you have 3 members who want to call a meeting on something, then I think that that's a safer number to go with than simply 2. Again, I still think it's important that two, and it's handled in a different policy, to be able to add any item to the agenda. But we're talking about calling a meeting. Yep, calling a meeting and declaring the purpose of the meeting, and the entire board needs to show up. So, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I truly understand the philosophy behind it, and I think 3 would be an appropriate number as well. Yes, Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I think 3 would be a good number to have. Like you said, it's under a quorum, but the seriousness of calling a meeting, I think you would want a few more, another member in on why they would be calling the meeting. So for me, I would be okay with 3.
Mr. Centers.
Yeah, I think, the perception that, folks who try to keep something from discussion was my concern. But, giving it some thought, the ability of 2 board members to put something on the agenda really does address that at a regular meeting. To call a meeting, though, when we have meetings scheduled 3 times a month, some districts will have one formal meeting on their calendar a month, and so I could see that if you go a month between meetings, but we have a meeting essentially every week. So giving that some thought, I think 3 people is appropriate, given the frequency and also that people can put things on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a very legitimate point. Other input? Mrs. Acosta?
I would just concur with Mr. Centers, and having attended, there was one of the many MASB courses that I attended. That was one of the questions that was presented, like how many meetings do people have? And everybody was shocked when I said we have pretty much a weekly meeting. So I think the fact that we do have these opportunities to have multiple discussions merits the 3 members.
Mrs. Jarvis?
I appreciate Mr. Center's point that we do have meetings frequently, because that does make it easier to put something on the agenda, which is certainly available for any of us to do. And I know that we had this discussion earlier. One thought that had occurred to me that we didn't bring up is the question of quorum, which is 4 people. We need 4 of our board members to agree on any item for it to come into being. And the concern I have with 3 to call a meeting is that's already 3 of the 4. And if there is a meeting called for something that is flippant, for lack of a better word, if we have 3 people who are already in support of that, that is something I would be cautious about. Whereas if we only have 2, then when that discussion were to happen, we would be able to, out of the course of the evening through discussion, determine whether that item would happen. I think it gives us more leverage in terms of considering items, whether they're, of reasonable consequence or not. And if we have 3 people, that's coming very close to that quorum number, that makes me a little cautious.
Other questions or comments? Mrs. Bonifield?
For me, I think I'm looking at this from kind of the opposite angle, where this is an extreme emergency, something that comes up that needs to happen. Mr. Abadi gave us a good example of one that happened recently. I have never been in a situation where we've called an emergency board meeting for any reason, good or bad. So for me, I think it's the logistics of if we get into a situation where we need to call a board meeting very quickly in order to pull things together so that we can, make a decision on maybe a pandemic item or something like that. I would prefer to and feel more comfortable with the two, but I'm absolutely on board with whatever the majority of the board feels is appropriate.
Thank you, Mrs. Battlefield. Mrs. Burton?
Even with this policy, the president and superintendent still have the ability to call an emergency meeting. This would be board members separate and apart from the president and superintendent. So we'd still have that right to do that. Because you're right, that's thankfully not very often, but emergencies do happen sometimes.
Other questions or comments? Mrs. Acosta?
This is more for clarification. So this would be a meeting where I wouldn't just saying myself, I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable approaching Superintendent or President Burton to say, hey, I think we need further discussion on this item. And then am I explaining myself? Then I would need 2 other members to then support the need for this continuation of discussion. Is that?
I think
'Cause
that's a
otherwise-
different situation. You're referring to an item that we've already talked about that we may just need more discussion on. I think that is one of the things that you would go either the president or Mrs. Oquist and say, I think we need to discuss that a little bit further. That's a little bit different than my view of what we're talking about on a special meeting. The other thing, and Mrs. Jarvis, you brought up a good point, but one of the things that I start to think about, I look at that third member as a second on a motion. The person who makes the motion and the person who seconded it may not both be in favor of the motion. All the motion in the second does is get it on the floor for a vote. It doesn't necessarily mean that those people are going to vote for it. I look at the calling of a special meeting the same way that you might call and say, I think we need to have a meeting on this item. I may not agree with your position on whatever the item is, but say, I agree, I think we need a meeting on it. I look at them in sort of the same terms. I don't necessarily look at it that either the second or the third person agree with whatever the position may be. But they're agreeing to at least bring it to a meeting so we can have a discussion on it. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense. I'm still kind of pondering what Mrs. Acosta was saying because the beginning of this says that a special meeting may be called by the president of the board, or, this is an or situation. And I'm trying to think of any situation where I wouldn't call the president, or right now Colleen, and say, hey, let's think about this. Do we need to call a special meeting? So, that's still stewing around up here.
Thank you. That's kind of what, I probably didn't explain myself well, but that's kind of what I was saying. Thank you.
Mr. Centers?
So this is kind of like a worst-case scenario here, but I would say if the board president, him or herself, did something kind of egregious or something that the board wanted to address, and you went to them and said, I think we need to have a special meeting about this, and they said, forget it, you would need to get a couple other board members. If you wanted just an agenda item that needed more discussion at the next board meeting, then you just need one other person if the board president didn't want to do it. But that's the only scenario I could think of, is if we had a board president theoretically that did something very egregious that we need to have a meeting about. Or, a superintendent or something did something really egregious, but the board president was very protective. Those are like the only things I could think of. Those are pretty fantastic scenarios, actually, but, I'm sure they've happened somewhere.
Well, and I think it's a good point that in the now 11 years that I've been on the board, we've never had a situation like that, or we've ever called, board members have called a special meeting. I think that's a testament to our cohesiveness to begin with. that we don't have a problem discussing items with each other. So, quite honestly, I'm good with the 3. Is that the consensus? That we'll go with 3?
I can live with 3. I still think 2 is probably, if something is that dire, I think we need to act on it as quickly as possible. And to my mind, 2 people would be sufficient, but I'm willing to, I can live with 3.
Okay.
I'm
So
comfortable
we're
with
gonna
3.
put that in 3, and then then we're good with that policy.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Thank you all.
We are on to bylaw of the board BCAE. Again, there were no changes. It just simply states that for a public hearing, we would include a meeting agenda.
Everybody good with that? Excellent. So we'll move on to BCAF.
Thank you, and this is under board operation, study session, and committee of the whole meetings. And so in addition to reference to a study session, in 3 places where a study session is listed, we also added or the committee of the whole meeting. So everything included in this policy, and it's rather brief, would apply to a regular special meeting or scheduling of a committee of the whole or study session.
Everybody good with that language? All right, that's a go.
All righty, and for BCB, the only change recommended under this bylaw was the subheading. Under board operations, it previously was entitled procedures during meetings, and this really is in the reference to the order of the business that takes place as opposed to procedures. So we're recommending a change of the subheading to read general order of business at regular meetings.
Everybody good?
Yep.
All right, so we'll move on to our last policy.
In BCBC, had no changes from the review we made last week, so it was in regard to preparation of the agenda. And it speaks to the superintendent and the board president cooperatively determine the business, but it also references a piece that you've all spoken about this evening that states any 2 members of the board may request an item to be included on the agenda. And so those agendas then are provided to the board no later than the Friday preceding the meeting. And we added that the agenda shall also be available on the district website prior to the meeting. So those are sent out via the board book link, and they're also available to the public.
All right, everybody good with that language?
You know what? I do have one
President
question
Burton?
on this. It's paragraph 2, where it says agendas shall be provided or mailed to the board, to the members of the board. We don't mail them. And I think provided covers whatever method of transmission, whether it's emailing now, which is what we do, or any other future way that we provide it, as long as it's provided too.
So you're
I mean,
suggesting?
I'm suggesting that we take off or mailed.
That might have pertained to the other interested parties that we removed.
Mm-hmm. But even, yeah, it's, even provided covers that. When we put it on the,
Yeah, we're
on the
gonna get
website,
it
we
via
provided
letter.
it to them.
However, we're gonna get it, We don't have to be specific on how we're gonna get it.
Right. And even if someone didn't have access to a computer or didn't utilize technology, and that does happen, provided still covers that. Then we can mail it to
Right.
them, but as long as we provide it to them.
Everybody good with removing that?
Yes.
Okay. So with that one change, are we good with that language? Excellent. That covers all of the policies. Now, these will be on for the first reading next week, and my recollection is we have second reading on other policies?
We have second reading, yes, on the policies from personnel. We have first reading on these policies, and then if these move forward, then they would be wrapped up at our final regular board meeting of the year on June 3rd,
13th, is it? No.
14th,
Mid-June.
mid-June.
All right.
It is June 14th, yes.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, and that concludes policy, President Burton.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda is our Personnel Committee. Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you. At this time, we don't have anything on the docket. Thank you.
Next item is item 7, Curriculum Committee. Mrs. Acosta?
Thank you, President Burton. At this time, we have nothing to report.
And last item, item 8, is our Legislative Committee. Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you, President Burton. At this time, we have nothing to report for the Legislative Committee unless Mrs. Oquist has something. Mr. Centers, do you have anything?
We do not. I do not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. This is very strange. It is 8 o'clock, and that brings us to the end of our agenda. Seeing nothing else before the board this evening, we are adjourned, and we will see you next week at our regular meeting. Have a nice evening.